In this video, we're going to take a look at tables in Excel. And before we do that, we're going to start off not with an Excel file, but with a text file. And if you look up here on the title bar in my web browser, you can see this is at my website. It's in a folder called Excel, in a folder called Samples, and then it's advising.txt. And the txt tells you that this is a text file. A text file is a file that is made up of only text, and the only formatting, I just made it a little bit bigger here, the only formatting that you can have with a text file, the fonts can't be changed, the size can't be changed, the color can't be changed, the margins line, none of that. The only formatting you can do is basically two things. When you get to the end of a line, you can hit the Enter key. The other thing you can do is you can press the Tab key if you want to separate two columns. That's what's been done with this file right here. You can see where this data looks like it wants to line up in columns. You know, we kind of see stuff in a line right down here, but every once in a while, like with the word Rutherford here, or Theodore, we got something that's a little bit too long in the first column, and so what would normally go in the second column for them gets pushed over to column 3. We've got a first name in the first column. We've got last names in here. We've got 4-letter abbreviations for majors in this column, and most of the majors are in that column, but some of them had a long first name or a long last name like Eisenhower, so they got pushed over a little bit. Then we've got the name of an advisor, and that should be the 4th column, and it is for Adams here. It is for quite a few people, but sometimes it got pushed over to the next column. If you had a long first name and a long last name, your advisor may have gotten pushed all the way over 2 columns further. After that, we've got a column called credits, and most of those credit numbers look like they're right here. And then the last thing is we've got an ID number, and if you look at the last number in each column, you can see that these are basically just sequence numbers, so I can get the data back in its original order. So you can tell by looking, if stuff tries to line up in columns, but it doesn't quite line up right, it is almost certainly a tab delimited text file. Okay, and to show you the tab characters, they don't show up in a browser, but I did copy this entire file to the clipboard, and then I went over to Word here and I pasted it in, and this is what it looks like in Word. Let me zoom in on this a little bit here, and I've got the Show Hide button pushed in, so it shows the tab characters. The tab characters are actually indicated by a horizontal arrow. And the default tab stops in Word are every ½ inch, so this stuff also does not line up the way it should. But if I select all of it, and this may not work, I'm going to mess with my tab stops up here. And I'm going to pull this one off, and it looks like I've got first name and last name and major lining up pretty well. Advisor is also lining up pretty well, and it looks like it pulled in some default tab stops from the browser, and everything works. Everything is now lining up in 6 columns. So this is basically the way the data was intended to be viewed. Unfortunately, because of the default tab stops in our web browser, it doesn't quite line up. But one nice thing about it is if those tab characters are there, then we can read this file into Excel or copy it and paste it into Excel, and Excel will figure out which stuff goes in which column. So that's what we're going to do right now. Let's do a Control A to select everything. Do a Control C to copy it to the clipboard. And then let's go into Excel here, and I've got a blank workbook open. And we're going to paste it in. Now, the first time we do this, it isn't going to work. I'm going to click on Paste here and just click regular paste, or actually just, do a Control V. The data gets there, but if you look carefully, all of the data is in column A. It did not get separated out into 6 columns like I wanted. So we're going to undo this. Got to do a couple of undos here because I also widened the columns a couple of times. So that doesn't work. So what you have to do is you have to try some other options, and there is an option here under the paste button called Paste Special, and there's also a keyboard shortcut for that, Control Alt V, but I usually just go up here and click on Paste Special, and then we get a couple of options. And how do you know which one of these to use? Well, try them and see if they work. I've tried them ahead of time, and I know that HTML does not work. We get the same result we did before. But you can pick either one of these text options. They both work out the same. And then click on OK, and it will bring the data in columns for us. And the only thing we need to do now is just widen some of these columns a little bit here so that we can see all of our data a little bit better. And there we go. Okay, so now we've got the data into Excel, and we're going to do a few things with it. This is a table, and if you tell Excel that you want to format this as a table, then you can do a few extra things with it. So we're going to click on, this is on the Home tab, we're going to click on Format as Table, and we've got a number of options here. Basically, each row is the same. The only difference is, which highlighting color is selected. So we're going to do one of the medium ones here. With the medium ones, you get column headings and you get banded rows. I'm going to pick the blue one. And if you start off with the cursor in the data, Excel is smart enough to figure out that this is where your table is. And your table should have headers. If you're doing table stuff, the columns really need to be labeled. You can probably get by without it, but 99% of the time you're going to want to have column headings up there. So I want this first row to be interpreted as headers, not as data. All the data starts in row 2. So go ahead and click on OK. And it just formatted everything. I've got banded rows. My first row up here is a dark blue background. It changed the text color to white, so it's easier to see. And it also gave us a new ribbon called Table Design. And under Table Design, what we're going to look at right now is just the stuff in here for table style options. So let's take a look at these 7 options here. The first option is whether we want a header row or not, and I'm going to turn that off, and then I'm going to turn it back on. You almost always want that one to be on. A total row is a row down at the bottom. If I turn that on, it adds an extra row for me down at the bottom, labels it total. And if there are numbers in the column, it usually adds them up. I'm not sure why it's not adding up this column, but it is adding up all of the ID numbers. And if I wanted to, I could easily go down here and I could tell it that I wanted to sum those numbers as well. And these are some things that you do not have if you don't have your data formatted as what I call an official table in Excel. When I say official table, I mean that if you click inside the data, this Table Design ribbon will appear, and you'll have all of these options here for things to do with your table. So I'm going to turn the total row off. If I scroll down now, it's gone away. Banded rows is something that I usually leave turned on just because it makes it easier to read across the row. Sometimes you may have labels in the first column and you want those to look different. So if we turn this on, everything becomes bold in the first column. Those are not labels. That's actually part of my data, so I'm going to turn that off. Sometimes you might have some totals in the last column, and so you want those to look a little bit different. Again, that's not the case here, so I'm going to turn that off. Sometimes you want banded columns, although I don't think you want this as often as you want banded rows. So the first, third, and fifth columns here are now banded and highlighted. And if I have both of those not at the same time, it looks really funny. So I'm going to turn banded rows off. And you see, that's what you really get with banded columns, but it looks a whole lot better, I think, if we turn banded columns off and leave banded rows on. And the last button up here is a filter button. That refers to these little drop-down boxes right here, these little arrows. And if I turn that off, they go away. If I turn it back on, they return. And with those filter buttons there, it allows me to do some filtering of my data. We're not going to look at that in this video. I have another video that explains filtering. In addition to doing filtering, there's also some options. If you click on one of these, we've got filters. We can do sorting by color, which is something you're not going to do very often, I don't think. But you can sort from the smallest value in the column to the largest, or the largest to the smallest, and that's something that's very useful. So we can basically pick any one of these columns here and sort alphabetically by first name or last name or major or advisor or credits or ID number. One more thing about tables, an advantage of converting data like this into a table, and you only do this if all the data on a row is connected to one another. So all the data on this row is for Dwight Eisenhower. But another reason for doing that is it makes it easy to expand the table. If you look carefully down here in the lower right hand corner, there's a little tab in the lower right hand corner. If I go to the last cell of my table and I hit the tab key on the keyboard, it opens up a new row for me, and I can add another row to my table, and that little tab indicates the lower right hand corner of the table. So now I've got a table with 45 rows, including the column heading. And if I go to the last row of this one and hit tab one more time, I get another row, and because I'm doing banded rows, this one is now going to have a light blue background. Okay, so it allows you to easily expand the table, and there are some features of Excel that will work a whole lot better. Your life will be easier if you use a table and assign a name to the table, and then use the name of the table in your functions. So, but that's not what we're going to do in this video. So I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to say I want to delete those two rows. And when I do, my little blue tab down here goes back to the bottom of row 44. So those are some ways to pull data into Excel and make it into a table and format it. And we'll talk some more about some of the things you can do with tables, especially sorting and filtering, in some subsequent videos.